Hi everybody, it's Nikki and I'm here to do another video that is personal experience, not to be used as medical advice. No medical advice anyway. I'm just coming on to talk a little bit about my new T-Slim because I've been on it now, I think for a week, about a week. And I've actually had the basal IQ turned on for 2.5 days now. And that had been by accident that I turned it on because I had planned on, leaving my pump running for a while without it on so I could kind of get used to the pump. And then by accident, I went ahead and started the sensor on my pump, which I guess triggers the basal IQ. So it's been on since. And the first probably 6 hours were a little jarring because I was afraid, of all the suspends because there was a lot of suspend activity going on. And because the 670G, the suspends were not always in my benefit, to my benefit. I was afraid I was not going to like these either. And so it took me, half a day probably before I started to get comfortable that this might not be the same thing. And now, and I plan on turning it back off again, but now here I am about 2.5 days in and it's still on. And I think I really like it. That's what I think. So it's still way too early and I'm not going to do the wrong thing by Medtronic or by the 670G and after 2.5 days say it's better than the 670G because that's ridiculous too. But I wore the 670G for almost a year and a half. And the first 2.5 days of the suspend is going better than what my suspends were going in manual mode on the 670G. And I'll tell you why I think that is, because this part gets a little bit confusing. I thought, for a long time because this is kind of deep down in the manual how these suspends work, but I thought that it was, for the 670G, that it was 30 minutes that it locked you in to see whether or not your problem would resolve itself. And if it didn't resolve itself, then I thought it locked you in for an additional hour and a half. This is in manual mode. And for me, every time I looked at my graph screen, there were these really long suspends, so I assumed they were the full 2 hours, either the 30 minutes or the 2 hours. When I was looking at the manual yesterday or the day before for a different reason, I saw in there that it can come back out of the suspend anytime during that 1.5 hours. And I'm thinking, I feel like mine never did. I feel like on the 670G that I was often suspended for the full 2 hours. Now, having read that, I think maybe it was for an hour and a half or something like that, but those are still very, very long suspends for me. And it makes me think that if my pump could have come back out of the suspend but didn't, then this might come down to a matter of the sensor. And if my Guardian definitely is slower than Dexcom, so maybe the reason the suspends were longer on the 670 was not because I was locked into them, but because the Guardian took longer to reflect, whatever they needed in their equation to kind of kick back in the insulin. Maybe it just took longer to get me there. Whereas with the Dexcom, I'm seeing regularly. With the T-Slim, I'm seeing regularly very short suspends, sometimes including for a couple of minutes. And I like that. I like it a lot. So the other day after a run, I saw a million suspends and they were short and my blood sugar was great all day long. Now this is not without any action on my own because I'm also doing things like taking in carbs and doing boluses and everything else. But it's what the pump is doing in the background, and I felt like that's what I want my pump to be doing, is something in the background, which is making it easier for me to do my job and not complicating things. So after a big run, it suspended itself over and over again, and that was great. And then the next day, on a rest day, there were very few suspends, a couple here and there, and that was great. And I realized that it is really kind of filling in the background. So I wasn't going to talk about that in the beginning, so here it is. But the things I did want to say right off the bat, again, it's a weekend and it's really too early to tell. But this is what I think so far. The T-Slim, the tones and alerts are very loud and they're attention grabbing. Now I have everything set to be on right now. And I probably won't always have that. At some point I think I'd like to turn everything off and just have it be quiet. But for right now I have everything set on because I want to know what it's doing. But it was one of my biggest complaints about the 670G is that I couldn't know what it was doing, including in manual mode, and I tried all the different, combinations of settings. It was just a quiet action on the part of the 670 to suspend your insulin, to suspend my insulin. And for me, that was really difficult because unless I was constantly looking at it, I didn't necessarily know I had been suspended, and then I wouldn't know until I was going high. With the T-Slim, with the settings turned on, I regularly am being alerted to the fact that my insulin is off, and then again that it's being turned back on again. Again, I don't know if I'm going to leave those settings on, but for right now, I really like them. I do like to know, oh yeah, that's right, like 15 minutes ago, I think my thing, and then to check to see, am I getting insulin? Am I not getting insulin? And so that part I really like. I like the communication. The clear indication of suspend if settings done, so I just said that, okay. I also discovered over the last 2 days, because that's all I've been in it, that if you need to do a bolus, and this is again kind of it's just a more flexible system. If I need to do a bolus while my pump is suspended, and I know I keep saying it that way because that's what I know from the 670G, but if the basal IQ is on, which is that I'm being suspended, but I want to do a food bolus. Let's say my blood sugar is a 60. I'm going to have a yogurt, which is going to help me correct that 60, but I know I need the insulin for it at the same time, and I want to do half the insulin for it. So let's say I want to do 1 unit of insulin, but I'm suspended. On the 670G, I would have to override the suspend, and by overriding the suspend, it would knock out my pump's ability to suspend me again, at least for another 30 minutes. So I was really curious with the T-Slim what was going to happen with that, and whether or not overriding it or turning it off was going to mean that it wasn't available again for 30 minutes or an hour, you know, whatever it was. And it turns out that overriding it or turning it off does not affect its ability to suspend you again as soon as the bolus is done. And I absolutely love that because now it makes me feel like I can override all day long if that's what I want to do. And I think that some days I'm going to want to do that. Not every day, right? Like some days I think I just really need less insulin. But I think I really like the idea that it's up to me, and if I want to just cancel it out 50 times today and have it kind of keep offering that suspend, I'm really okay with that. That was working really well the other day. I decided to override a few times here and there or to turn it off, and it worked really well, and it turned right back on after a bolus. So I like that. Again, with the 670, it's just a little bit more rigid than that, so it made it more difficult. Okay. Anyway, so that was, oh, here's another one. On my 670G, I actually did a video saying remember to hit calibrate, I think it was. But the other one was remember to hit deliver or okay or whatever the final, you know, button was for delivering a food bolus or a correction bolus. It was the craziest thing. It was this quiet, it would time out and not tell you that it hadn't delivered the bolus. So unless you happen to be looking at your pump as the final screen disappeared. So if I'm trying to deliver a food bolus and the last thing I had to hit was next and I didn't hit it, after 30 seconds maybe, the screen would just disappear. And then I would not be alerted that I hadn't completed the bolus. So I was really, really pleasantly surprised the other day when I got an unusual sound from my pump, and when I looked down, it said incomplete bolus or something like that. And I realized that it was one of the things I didn't like about the 670 is that, you know, my life is that way. Like I've got 3 kids and a whole lot of and cats and, you know, stuff going on. So sometimes I forget to hit deliver or whatever, or I look away. And there was never any indication to me that I hadn't delivered that bolus until sometimes an hour later or whatever when my blood sugar was really high. So it's a small thing, but it's a really nice thing to know that my pump is going to make whatever sounds just to let me know to go back and hit deliver. And I can go ahead, I don't have to start back over. If I accidentally looked away before I hit deliver, I don't have to go back through the menu and start the whole thing again. It, you know, as soon as you turn on the screen, it takes you right back to your last screen. So that's an easy fix. Small detail, but for me it was a really big deal. Speaking of the not having to clear out of menus, that was another one that I really liked. So far I really like that more with the T-Slim than I did with the 670. The 670, that's one of the things you'll hear people saying is about the button pushing. And a lot of that is because no matter where you go into the menu, the only way back out is to back out through all the same buttons. I might not be saying that perfectly, but I think pretty much if you go down into something, you kind of need to back out of it. So it ends up in a whole lot of button pushing. The T Slim, I can't say it's not. I mean, there's some menus you have to hit back. There's a word, this is back there, but it doesn't feel like. First of all, if it times out, you start at that last screen, so that's a really nice thing because it doesn't mean you have to start at the beginning, which is what you do with the 670G. It's just there's less button pushing and it's touch screen anyway, so it's kind of just easier. These are small things. I mean, I'm starting with small things because, as I said, I'm doing the basal IQ now, and I think I'm gonna really like it, but I don't feel like I'm anywhere near being able to kind of discuss the pros and the cons of that. But there are some of these small details that I've noticed just from putting it on, and most of it I really, really like. The one thing I'd say that I think I prefer the 670G for is the graph screen, and I'm still trying to get used to it, but I do feel like as far as being able to see time, and here it is right here, I do feel like it's, these numbers are really, really small, and I feel like it's a little bit harder to get an idea what time things happened. And I'm also not sure, I think the answer is no, but I'm not sure whether or not you can find boluses on your graph screen. And I did find that the 670G's graph screen, with the ability to look at your boluses, your corrections, your food boluses, I'm trying to think of what else, that it was all there in the graph screen. And it really got so that I was using that graph screen all the time for information. So if there's anything right now that the T Slim is not winning in, I think it might be the graph screen. But I'm okay with that. And so far, I absolutely love it. And these are just some early thoughts. But anyway, thank you very much. Hope you guys have a great day, and bye.